As a fat person, going to a comedy show often means preparing yourself to be the punchline of at least one bad joke. But what if it didn't have to be that way? Well, it might not be possible to achieve a completely inoffensive night of comedy. And honestly, maybe we wouldn't want that either. In Vancouver, New Moon Comedy might be the closest we can get to a feminist sense of humor. The show's founder, Jackie Hoffart, explicitly features women, queer folks, people of color, and a maximum of one cis male per show, if at all. I sat down with Jackie to discuss how they develop New Moon, how they navigate identity politics in comedy, and how to land a joke when everyone in the room is not necessarily on the same page. So, to start off, can you please state your name, how you identify, including your pronouns, and any other positionalities that you feel are relevant to this interview?
Sure thing. My name is Jackie Hoffart, and I'm a white settler. I recently learned settler occupier, which is like a more active way to acknowledge the crime of settler colonialism. So yeah, I would say I have a slippery grasp on the pronoun she. I'm more comfortable with they. And absolutely I won't count out he. I mean, one day maybe. So yeah, I'm a she, they, basically. And you could call me a trans fat, maybe. Just kidding. Sorry.
Oh, that's a little disappointing. I was hoping I could actually use that.
Maybe you can. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I'm very slow to embrace non-binary identity. It feels good, but it also feels like, whew, it's chaos. So I'm allowing the chaos to happen, but not trying to make too many firm shapes out of it.
I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. I think we can work with that.
Okay, good. Yeah. But I did see, I was literally looking at a bag of chips the other day and I was like, no trans fats. And I was like, oh, that's funny. I'm a trans fat. But it, of course, comes up in a negative context. But
I don't think it matters. I think you should still use it.
Yeah, it's nice though.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Do you identify then as fat, or do you use any other terminologies in terms of identifying your positionalities in relation to your body size?
Yeah, so I'm a something kind of small mid fat in the common lexicon, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, it depends on the context, really. I think I think I was really nervous to come and do this because I feel of all of my identities, fatness is probably the one that I'm kind of the least studied on, and so I'm a little bit nervous, I guess, about tripping up on some internalized fat phobia and stuff like that. But it's not to say I don't identify as fat. I mean, I've been moving in fat spaces for a little while and hanging out with fat people and doing fat things. But yeah, it's not like a top tier identifier, I guess, in my identity kaleidoscope. Do kaleidoscopes have tiers? Anyway.
Layers.
Yeah.
I feel it's interesting to hear you say that because I made the mistake of assuming that a visibly fat person who was very active in my more political communities would feel comfortable being acknowledged as being fat. And that was a very uncomfortable conversation to have after I made that mistake. And I think I similarly assumed, because we play on the heavy hitters together, or we did when COVID didn't decimate all things fun, that you would feel comfortable with the word. And I do want to preface then by saying that I don't think that necessarily also, or I didn't assume then that meant that you were the most political or well-read or well-versed person about it either. But I did assume that you felt comfortable identifying with that community just based on that participation. And I do apologize if I got that wrong.
Oh, no. You don't have it wrong. It's more just I mean, I think, so my first sort of foray into identifying as fat was when a good old friend of mine invited me to the fat group on Facebook, like Fat Vancouver or whatever it's called. And I remember thinking, okay, all right, there's something for me to learn here. And then I was like, oh, this is such a beautiful, I mean, I mostly found it to be a really beautiful space. And I really liked how thoughtful people were and how, especially how much like, that anti-fat bias is rooted in anti-blackness and all of that stuff that would come up often. I remember thinking, okay, this is a Facebook group I can get with. But yeah, and then, I think also just like my experience with my body has been a gradual, really slow journey into fatness or more and more fatness over time, especially over the pandemic, but also really over the last decade, I would say. And I don't know, I just kind of go about my life the same as before when I wasn't fat. So I can appreciate you thinking that that I would have like a fluency about that. But yeah, we'll see, I guess. I hope I have enough like interesting things to say to you about my experience in my fat body.
I mean, I obviously think you do, and that's why I asked you to participate in this podcast. But I also am mostly just interested in your experiences in the comedy scene, to be honest, because I think that with fatness being such a like visible characteristic that we obviously, especially when you think about yourself as a performer, where people are literally looking at you because you are on a stage or dark basement or whatever, that like, your fatness comes to play. But also, I'm just kind of curious about how well, we're going to get into it, but the spaces that you've created as well as the spaces that you've infiltrated as well. Yeah, and that kind of is what I want to focus on. I guess I should start though by asking how have fat people or fatness in general typically been approached or used in comedy in your mind or in your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, first thing that comes to mind is like Chris Farley singing Fat Guy in a Little Coat, right? Like fat people are in comedy and are sort of comedy in a lot of ways, in the sense that it's absolutely mainstream to make fat jokes in comedy. I would consider it to be, right there next to sort of like weather jokes or like seasonal jokes is fat jokes. People just make them, and I think a lot of people make them without even necessarily realizing, oh, this is a fat joke, or this is a joke that people might be hurt by. Like I don't think a lot of comics have thought that deeply about it because of how entrenched anti-fat ideas are in our culture. But there was something sort of also a little, I want to say, I was thinking a little bit about this before I got here today, about how there's something so charming about Chris Farley particularly, and even him doing Fat Guy in a Little Coat, like it's actually him in a way sort of plainly stating something like, I'm a fat person but I'm in a little coat, and so that's awkward for me. It could be neutral. It could be that the joke isn't, just sort of, haha, look at this fat guy. Because of course he's getting the joke he's getting the sort of contrast, right? But I think it, so there's something sort of sweet that resonated for me out of him trying to be like, I exist, in saying that. But at the same time, I mean, it's 2022. I think, it's still like a dirty word or concept in most of comedy. And I think that hasn't really stopped. I mean, there's a sort of, I don't know, axiom or common practice even with stand-up where, and I think you referenced this a little in your question, but where it's pretty common to sort of address how you look right off the top. In fact, I received some unsolicited advice from someone pretty early on in my comedy career that was like, like specifically asking me to do this, like mention your glasses or like mention whatever. And so not anything about my body, but that's pretty common. And so, but for me, I keep, I don't know, maybe I've disassociated or maybe I'm dysphoric, but I don't know. I just haven't quite figured out how to make a lot of jokes about myself being fat, because so much of comedy is about sort of stating something and then twisting it. But you have to be kind of with the audience together on the premise in order to twist it. But I feel like I personally come from already a twisted premise, which is like fat's not bad, like, you know, health at every size, whatever the things are. And like, and it's difficult to sort of start there and then go somewhere else if the audience isn't going to be with you or get it. And so, you know, I don't know. I mean, there's the good news is that in comedy, in stand-up comedy particularly, there are fat comics out there, and like I think of, I mean, not just like the dead ones like John Candy, but also like there's a Fortune Feemster or Feimster, I can't remember, Feemster I think, Deb DiGiovanni, and then also Candy Palmater, unfortunately R.I.P. But these are sort of fat, funny people. I feel like actually Oprah also sort of counts in this way, just because she's sort of funny. She's a funny person and super problematic, obviously. But it's someone I thought of when I think of, you know, especially considering how much she's meme-ified at different sizes. And yeah, it's a tricky terrain. I would say there's a lot of people out there who think you can't be like a sexy comedian, like, or that you're getting it too easy if you're like a, I don't know, traditionally thin person or whatever. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm one of them. Like, I'm not sure I agree with that, but I do think there's, you know, these privileges have interplay.
I'd never thought about that before, about how a joke would only land if everyone in the room is on the same page or has the same baseline knowledge. I never actually thought about that, because I think, and then, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because I do want to talk about why you started your comedy show and how you create this very intentional space, which is kind of gatekept in a way, but for good. But I'm curious about your comedy show prioritizes people of color, women, and queer folks. And so I do think that the target audience for that show, and please correct me if I'm wrong, does involve people who are somewhat political or do understand the importance of that. At least you would hope so, theoretically. And so
if we get some like normies in the audience, it can be a real mixed bag.
So that can change the environment, right? Mm-hmm. So how then do you traverse that territory? How do you gauge what the baseline is for the audience that night in terms of how far or how complicated can my joke be?
It's a good question. I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of people who don't ever change their sets, but also there's so much nuance in sort of like what even a change means. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, you can interact with the audience without changing your material. In fact, you must, I think, to be a good comedian, acknowledge the energy in the space, and also the reactions or lack of reactions that you're getting from the audience, like instant feedback and instant sort of maybe adjustment.
When I first saw an ad for your comedy show, I was completely mesmerized by it because I had never seen a space held in the comedy industry that was prioritizing specifically and explicitly queer folks, people of color, and women. And my dad and I love to go see live comedy. That was always a thing growing up in our family. And I kind of just expected to go in that space, and I could anticipate that at some point I was going to be made to feel uncomfortable because a joke would be told at my expense. And so when I saw your show advertised, I was so excited to go because I was like, oh my goodness, I might not have to anticipate that. And I'm also so excited to support these people. And how beautiful is it that this space exists? So can you talk a bit about why you started that show and how you sort of came to that place where you wanted to create that space and why you chose to do it in the way that you did?
Yeah. There's definitely a kind of alchemy of how the show started, that has to do with a little bit of chance and a little bit of, creativity, I guess. But, and also just a little bit of, and I think this must just be part of my personality, but just not really caring what people thought or what was normal or what was kind of what commonly exists. I just sort of did what I wanted to do, and didn't really ask if it turns out there aren't many rules. But so, I inherited the room. So just what happened was I was a comic already, and I was going to this room, and there was a show called Foxhole Comedy, and the comedian Brian Constantine had started it, who was also like a big person who organized Little Mountain Gallery, which is also now dead / reinventing itself. But he's a good guy, and he, I just remember thinking, oh, this space is so pretty, like this room is so cute and cool, like I want this show to do better. But I'm also the type of person who would check the lineup before I would go to a show to see if there was mostly like anybody interesting that I thought that I would like on it, but also to avoid if there was someone that I was like, oh, I know I don't like their comedy, I just can't be bothered. And so one night I asked him if I could just help him with the social media. And he was like, do you want to just take over the show? And I was like, oh, okay. And so like from 1 week of just being a person who mostly attended as like a fan and then also occasionally performed, I was like running it. And so, and the time was fall 2017, which, if you'll remember, was the beginning of the current phase of the Me Too movement. And so, it was a weird time to be starting a comedy show that was like, yeah. And then right away I was sort of like, I mean, we burned through his bookings for a couple weeks, but then right away I was sort of like, okay, this show is for women and queers and people of color, like this sort of identity, like Rubik's Cube, that, was sort of designed to explicitly sort of ostracize cis het white men. Like, no. Essentially my rule was, they're just everywhere. They're just all over comedy. They just, because comedy has no barrier to entry. You have to have just the smallest smidge of entitlement in order to get into it. And so as a result, it's just covered in cis het white men. And some of them are really funny. Like, don't get me wrong, some cis het white men are very funny. And in a respectful, thoughtful, political way. Like, it exists. It's rare, but it exists. And just in the same way, like being any identity category doesn't actually mean you're going to have any, have, the wokest point of view or whatever. Like, these things are not mutually, or they are? No, they're not mutually exclusive. And still, I just sort of felt like I'm okay with what's lost in making this choice. Like, I'm one small show on a Wednesday night. Like, I don't need cis het white men to be a big part of this. They're just not centered here. The end. And so from those beginnings, I ended up getting a little bit more sort of severe over time. I noticed that I ended up booking a lot of white people. So about a year in, I put a sort of cap really on my booking to make sure that I never booked more than half of my lineup as white folks, just because they also naturally feel entitled to take up space. And so since it's literally a game of space taking up comedy, I sort of go out of my way to find other comics and comics of color and trans comics and women in general who aren't any of those things, and made a space that felt like it could be somewhere where they could get better. I'm really reluctant to use the word safe space. It's so, I think we've moved on from safe space. I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like it in comedy when it's used to describe my show, even though in the fall of 2017 and in the beginning of 2018, me and two other female comedian producers banded together to try to make a safer spaces coalition around Me Too mobilizing and trying to get abusers out of the scene, which ultimately ended up being way untenable and not something that we could properly manage, and we just got overwhelmed and burnt out. But the label safe space stuck to my room. And I don't love that, actually, just because I think I can't guarantee safety. I can't guarantee that someone's not going to make a joke that's where homeless people are the butt of the joke, or where drug users are the butt of the joke, or where fat people are the butt of the joke. I actually can't control that. I don't preview people's comedy. And even if I did, I don't control what they choose to say when they come on the show. And so I think people assume I have a little bit more authority than I do, which, bless, I don't. The only real control I have is whether or not I rebook someone. Sometimes people come on and say something that's offensive to me, or that I just find, upsetting. And then it will depend on the relationship I have with them, whether or not I talk to them about it or not. And I generally don't. I actually generally don't. What I'll generally do is not book someone again, or maybe chat with them about that joke if I want to have them on again.
I think that a lot of people turn to comedy at a time where they want to take their feminist hat off because they just want to laugh and enjoy themselves. And burnout is a real thing. Being constantly hypervigilant about what you're doing and what you're saying is exhausting.
Totally.
And I know, at least for myself, that when I mean, that's why I love reality television.
Yeah.
And I admittedly my whole degree is around reality television. I've built my life around reality TV. Wow. And I, at the same time, no matter how informed I am about how problematic reality TV is, I still sometimes take off my feminist hat and watch a show. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I do sometimes feel like there are people in the room who are watching me to wait for my reaction. Mm. And sometimes I feel that way too when I'm watching a comedy show and there is a fat joke, and perhaps, it's punching down and not punching up. I do feel the eyes on me, even just of people who I'm there with, to gauge whether or not it's okay for them to laugh. Mm-hmm. How do you handle those situations when they're happening in the moment?
I mean, there's not a lot of handling that can be done once someone said something that doesn't sit right with folks. And in a lot of cases, you can't necessarily know. I mean, I don't pretend to be sort of all-knowing. Certainly, as a white person, I just feel like there's so many mistakes and ignorances that I have that I can't even perceive. And I think, I can operate with that as a principle, but I can't necessarily always. I certainly can't control even all the time what I'm going to say. Never mind what someone else is going to say. And so I would say there's definitely a difference. There's been one or two times where I've sort of have a relationship with a comic and sort of mentioned to them after, that joke, what you're actually doing there is making fun of homeless people. That's maybe not cool. I don't know. I'll come at this a different way. So I started the show because I didn't find myself, I didn't feel seen by comedy shows. I didn't feel like I could sort of trust going to a comedy show. I would never take a date to a comedy show. And then I thought it doesn't have to be like that, it doesn't even have to be I watch sports, which definitely feels to me like the taking my feminist hat thing off, because even though it's sort of arguably can be fine or whatever. Like there's just so much sort of garbage that goes along with it. And, you know, I don't know, but I can love parts of it. And I think a lot of the people who sort of, I don't know. I mean, my hope is that no one actually cares about me, but I think I am some people's enemy in the community, and or the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And because initially when I started the show, there was a lot of, like, oh, you're a feminazi, and you're like, you're being sexist to men and all of this kind of stuff. And I was just like, I don't know. I was just like, I don't really care. And another thing was that it was initially a little bit difficult to find my audience because I sort of constructed or envisioned my audience as the people who don't typically go to comedy shows because they're like, I'm not going to like it. And so I couldn't advertise in all the normal places. And there was definitely a bit of like friend network and expanded sort of community that helped me out initially, and so that I didn't get sort of canceled, but like literally canceled, not metaphorically canceled. That is a forever risk. But yeah, I think we were, I was pretty, something that happened was that we were actually really embraced by, I don't know, this community that that was kind of turned on by that idea, because you can totally laugh and do comedy about anything. And it doesn't have to be, even this punching up, punching down kind of language. I mean, when pressed, I also use this sort of rubric, but I ultimately think there's just infinite possibility when it comes to stand-up comedy, and how, your biases will always come out, but especially under pressure, or something I've noticed, if you get knocked off your flow, certainly comics can react in a bad way to the audience, or like under the extreme stress of all the lights and the audience and the pressure. Like occasionally people will like kind of lose it on stage and start like attacking audience members and things like that. It's never happened at one of my shows, but it has happened to comics who, and I'm going to just say it, cishet white guys have occasionally come to my show and been like shocked that their material wasn't received as the way it would normally be received. But another thing I was going to say too is that, and you mentioned this about like people just want to laugh, or people want to look to you to know if they can laugh. And I think for me, this gets into sort of like Nanette territory where people laugh because tension has been relieved, right? And so people can laugh because they're uncomfortable, not necessarily because something's funny. So when a lot of straight white comics will sort of say like, if it's funny, people laugh. And I think people will laugh sometimes if they're uncomfortable. And
it's true.
There's a total difference. Yeah. Another thing too is like the bigger the room, the more laughs you're going to get, like the end. So in a small room full of like, and I do tend to, I think this is true of all producers, but I do tend to replicate myself in the audience. So I do find that my audiences are a lot like me. There are a lot of queer people on dates in my audiences. They are predominantly white, my audiences. Like they're a little mixed, but I would flatter myself if I said they were truly mixed. They're not truly mixed. They're sort of mixed. And, I mean, I'm happy to have been able to create something for people who otherwise sort of can't be bothered with comedy. But, I want to acknowledge the limitations of the people that I can speak to.
I think too that sometimes I feel like a joke is, or a term, let's say, is only funny if I say it. Mm. It's not funny if one of my thin friends says it. Mm-hmm. Because again, like as much as we want to say that funny is funny, it's not. Your positionality and the mouthpiece that it's coming from really dictate what is meant, behind those words.
Yeah, context matters.
Yeah, exactly. Context matters. And at risk of putting you on the spot, I kind of want to ask you and take advantage of the fact that you are a comedian to ask if you have any jokes about fatness. And if you do, could you care to share?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you about a couple. It's not quite the same as like doing the jokes, but
Right.
also knowing that we are obliged to honor the CRTC. There are a few words that would change for some of my jokes, but I definitely had a joke that was like, again, I mean, this is also sort of a style thing. Like, it's didn't really have a punchline, but I did have a joke where I was like, oh, I've gained a lot of weight recently, and basically like the whole joke, and it kind of always made people laugh, was just saying like like it's a C word, but let's just say mound um, has a profile now. And like, I would just say that, and everybody kind of gets it. And it was just sort of like, I was just trying to comment on like, this is an area where I previously experienced a kind of lack of there being something there, where there is now something. And it was just sort of me trying to make a mention of it. But I think it does count as a kind of fat joke, because that's what I'm talking about. I'm like, there's more fat on my body now in this particular place. And like, isn't that kind of interesting, or isn't that kind of funny? And sort of, it became a little uncomfortable doing that joke, because of course everyone's eyes immediately go to the place in your body that you're talking about. So that was also like a bit stressful for me personally. I also made a joke just once, and I don't think I'll do it again, which was just when we had our first or second show back after 2 years of pandemic hiatus. And I said something about my skinny jeans and how they weren't skinny before the pandemic. Haha, I gained weight, like whatever, right? And I don't really like it, because again, I don't think it's particularly smart or like refreshing or interesting in any way. Like, but I do want to be able to talk about gaining weight, because I think it's so real, and particularly in the pandemic, I think it's so real and so relevant for people that there has to be a way to talk about it. But I have often found it challenging. Like, for example, when my cat died, I really wanted to find ways to make jokes about it. And I would find that there was absolutely no way to bring up a dead cat and have a joke work around a dead cat. Like, I just can't make a dead cat funny. And in the same way, I feel like I haven't yet found a lot of ways or good ways to talk about fatness where I'm expecting the audience to think like I do about it being sort of neutral or descriptive, and not have to like teach them that first. Like, I could, I suppose. A lot of people have jokes about like, oh, it's nice being gay because you don't have to teach your partner that you're a human. And it's like, some people do this on stage too, where they're like, oh, I'm a woman, like you're perceiving me as a woman, and so I have to let you know that I'm a human being first. And then we can get onto this other stuff. And it's kind of like, it's too much setup for me. So I don't have a lot of jokes out there about fatness, because I just haven't quite found a way to do it. But I will say I'm involved in this project right now where I have to work with a lot of video footage of myself, and it's bracing. Like, it's actually really bracing. I don't typically obsess over my appearance in a lot of ways, or in some ways, maybe mostly the hair, but like, I've sort of coped through like smart accessorizing, and not necessarily maybe spending enough time like processing some of my own internalized fat phobia. And so I think when it comes to comedy, I mean, we all know, we learned from Hannah Gadsby, like self-deprecating humor is like ultimately painful. And I feel the same way when I see, there's definitely comics of color that I don't have on my show because I find their jokes racist. And like, that's hard for me to say as a white person, but like, ultimately I don't want to have comedy in my room that's relying on racist tropes. And that's what a lot of people do, and that's what some fat comics do too. They'll make jokes about themselves so people can be like, I'm laughing at this fat person, it's okay, I can laugh at this fat person. Just kind of like how Russell Peters used to do accents, right? Like, my feeling is that he's letting you laugh at the thing that you would maybe secretly want to laugh at.
Yeah.
Right? You're getting permission to laugh.
Exactly.
And not, nothing's being sort of flipped or reversed or, appended in that humor. And so for me, it's not, liberatory.
I really appreciate you reflecting on the process of making it's a web series, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, making your web series. Because when I was creating a fundraising campaign video for Fat Hiking Club, I was on camera. And I'm not on camera for the documentary, but as the director and all the other hats, I had to be on camera for the fundraising video. And so I went and filmed it. And when I went home and looked at the footage, I cried for probably 3 days. And my partner at the time asked me what was wrong. And I said, I hate how I look on camera. I look so fat. The film was called Fat Hiking Club. It was a form of fat activism. And yet I still felt shame at how I looked on camera. And I felt like the world's biggest hypocrite. And I think that there's a lot of pressure on public-facing people who care about the world and want it to be a better place to not have these very real, normal feelings about themselves. And it makes it difficult to participate because you feel like a fraud. At least I felt like a fraud.
No, it's true. I mean, I can reflect this back in terms of even the conversation we were having sort of off the top about kind of like how, how much or to what extent I identify as fat. And it's sort of like, or in what contexts, right? And I think because, like you said too, there's something so visceral and sort of corporeal, if I dare, about comedy that it can seem like it would be obvious that I've confronted or am accustomed to the way I appear. And for two reasons. Like, one, I typically audio record my sets, so I'm quite used to listening to myself do my sets, but but video is like a whole other beast. And I mean, even the joke that I told last week, which was something about, how I'm the type of person people ask directions, and how, people in Costco sort of love me and like ask me for advice and compliment me on my shoes and things like that. And honestly, like, my experience watching the video of myself making that joke gave me this whole new layer where I was like, oh, I look non-threatening. Like, I look like I'm not going to hurt anyone. And so that's why people approach me. And when I'm seeing myself saying that, it seems like I've missed a line that I'm not saying. Like, oh, people approach me because they don't think I'm going to hurt them, right? Or they don't think I can hurt them. It's probably true. But because I've never punched anyone in my life. Like, I don't even think I would know how. But and like, let me tell you, that spills into this non-binary thing where I'm like, as I engage with different elements of like transition and like even top surgery and all of these things, I'm kind of like, okay, whoa, bod mod, like being perceived as a man, like being less safe, like dealing with sort of all of these layers of being woman identified or female identified, like, and sort of shaving elements of them off. To me, it's like, ooh, like what else falls away? Like what else crumbles? And like, yeah, I think safety. I mean, I think our whole society is designed around white women's safety, right? Or apparent safety or feeling of safety. And so I think, shifting away at that it makes me feel less safe, like in a way that is worth interrogating.
I want to say something and I don't know how it's going to land, but
That's my favorite thing.
yeah, I feel like what I loved about that joke when you told it was that you were speaking to part of the fat experience, which is that I think a lot of fat people do come across as not threatening because of our fatness. And so, and I also think as well that what you're touching on, even in terms of your gender identity, and that removing body fat could make you more threatening in some ways or move you towards these identities. I think they're all connected.
Yeah.
And so that joke, when you told it in your set last week, to me, it was a fat joke, and it was a good fat joke.
Interesting.
Because you were talking, like, I have a face that people love to say things to.
Yeah.
And I am the person who people ask for directions. And I am the person where if you want recommendations for Costco, you're
Yeah.
going to trust my opinion. And part of that is because I'm a fat person.
Yeah. But I think it wasn't until watching it visually that I clocked that. Like, even in creating it and telling that sort of 5, 10, 15 times, like, it never occurred to me that that was part of it, because I don't clock myself as fat all the time until I see myself, right? Like, this is where it's so, there just feels like so much work still, or so much healing still around, like, I don't see myself as fat in the sense of like bad, right? I don't see myself as like whatever the most negative imagery I can think of in my head from when I was 11 and like went with my mom to Weight Watchers. Like, none of that comes into play when I'm just making a joke about Costco. Like, I don't know. And I think that the sort of power of that disassociation is, I don't know, like, I'm missing a trick or two. I think I could be funnier if I could just sort of figure how to get my hands around my own fat, like, identity.
I feel though that also these conversations and these topics are so complex.
Yeah.
And we as a society haven't grappled with those complexities yet,
No.
that we don't know how to approach them, and we don't have a collective agreement on how we can laugh at them and how we can talk about them. We're starting to get there with other things, I think, but I do think that fatness is still just way too complicated, because as soon as you start to talk about like health at every size, you're veering on healthist territory and ableism and all these other really important things.
No, I agree. And yet it doesn't take much, actually. You just have to, I think, be driven a little bit more by kindness than by sort of exploitation, which is totally possible in comedy. You just have to sort of constantly choose one or the other. I think there's a lot of people that would say, oh, good comedy is always gonna sort of exploit or extract or push down on someone or something. But I don't know. I think there's just so much more possibility.
I end every interview like this, but I'm curious. This is a lot of labor, like, that we take on when we want to do good work and we want to be thoughtful and we want to be mindful, and also just existing in the world with varying marginalized identities. It can be exhausting. And I'd like to know what non-fat folks can do to make comedy spaces specifically more, not even just fat friendly, but just more accommodating. And I know you don't like the word safe space. I'm trying to think of a euphemism. I can't at the moment.
Well, safer.
But more, safer
sure.
or more welcoming.
Yeah. I mean, I will say a couple things about that, and just to sort of accept your praise. Thank you so much. But also, you know, I did one show a few years ago that was like a all fat show, and it was really tricky because, you know, I mean, that's actually, I think, the most challenging audience to not like mess up around, because, you know, in a venue that's not accessible to chairs or walkers, right? Like, there are so few venues in the city in general. And then of those, there are so few that are affordable. And then of those, there are so few that also have stairs or wide seats or a variety of seats or all sorts of different things. And like, this is just a problem that I navigate, and not always successfully. And so I feel like this is something that one of the people on my show like really wrestled with before even accepting to perform. She was kind of like, I don't know if I can perform at a venue that is only accessible by kind of steep stairs. Like, I just don't know if that works for me. and my community. And I was like, I totally get and respect that. And, she ended up deciding to perform, and I was really grateful. But at the same time, I mean, there are so many people that aren't, I guess I'm just very reluctant to sort of say like, oh, I'm opening up comedy to like all the people who can't do it normally or aren't accepted normally. And it's like, no, it's not quite true. Like I will never give myself that much credit. But I mean, I think it's the same thing, in terms of what sort of would-be allies can do is sort of look around and see if you have fat friends, and if you don't, like, think about why, and start to consider how you can have more people in your life that are fat, and what that might look like, and not to sort of, diversity quota your friend group or whatever, but like to just to consider what might be operating under the surface that prevents that from happening.
Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Jackie. Where can people learn more about you and your work?
You're so welcome. My show that I run actually has like various names. New Moon Comedy is the name of the show. So new moon, like not a full moon, new moon, not like the werewolf thing or whatever that was. Vampires, I can't remember. New Moon Comedy Show on Instagram. We're on Facebook too, but I'm like trying to slowly slough off Facebook like a exfoliated layer. New Moon Comedy Show. And then, on Twitter and on Instagram, personally, I'm ostensibly clear, which is just, I don't know. Like I picked it as my like live journal username like 15, 20 years ago. And then it just sort of stuck. It's a quote from the opening, the 10th edition of Judith Butler's Gender Trouble about where she's criticizing the ostensibly clear view, as in like she's taking up the criticism of how her work lacks clarity, and she's sort of saying like, what does clarity leave obscure? Like what ruses motor the ostensibly clear view? And I was kind of like, oh, I like that. So anyway, ostensibly clear on Twitter. But I don't know. I don't think I'm very funny on Twitter. I'm always just like really earnest and really like, wow, I'm having so much fun, or like, whoa, this is terrible, or like ACAB or whatever. So yeah.
All still necessary tweets in the Twitterverse.
Right? You gotta find the right context. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. This podcast is produced and directed by me, Layla Cameron. Both audio and video versions of this podcast were edited by Ari Conrad Birch. Each interview was filmed and audio recorded by Rami McHale. Additional video was filmed and edited by Felix Naud and directed by ETW Media Productions. The music for this season is by the band Parlor Panther. Funding for this podcast is supported by TELUS STORYHIVE.